Time for culture then, as I say, books today. Here on set with us once again is Clément Massé. Thanks very much. Good to see you again. This week's book review, and in France in September, of course, it symbolises the end of the summer holidays for most families as well, certainly does for me, and of course the return to school for most pupils. In the literary world, it is also the time of year when hundreds of new novels are published, and Clément's been reading some of them. The first one is Toni Morrison's Home, which just came out here in France, came out in the US a little bit earlier on this year as well, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And Toni Morrison's readers know that she's been writing about African Americans with novels set at different times in American history. And in this one, the year is approximately 1953 when the Korean War ends, just a couple of years away from the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, and which means that the novel is set at the midst of segregated America. And that is an important thing to point out, I think, because it places the novel once again at the heart of Toni Morrison's literary quest for uncovering the roots and telling the negative lives of African Americans throughout US history. Home tells the story of Frank Money, who's just come back from the war in Korea. He's a war veteran. The fighting is far behind him, or so it seems, because as he comes back, another war awaits him at home, and a very personal one, that is. He's going to have to fight for his sister's life. She's been medically abused by a doctor who hired her as an employee, and the battle he engages in for his sister brings him closer to yet another battle, a personal one, that is, an inner one, a quest for his own self. The reader understands his inner journey as the story unfolds, but it's a long road for Frank Money, for he has to deal with memories from the past, one that brings him back to his childhood, with his sister, and which is told at the opening of the novel, and the second one which deals with a wartime event during the war in Korea, where a girl is killed. I was telling you just a minute ago that it was important to point out the fact that the story is set a couple of years before the Civil Rights Movement begins. Well, it seems to me that behind Frank Money's quest for his sister's life and for himself lie the roots for the protests that will unfold in the upcoming decade. Because as African Americans will challenge white supremacy in the US, will ask for equal rights, he too seems to be already claiming the right to become the human being each and every one of us yearns to become. In its form, Home is a rather sober and short novel compared to Toni Morrison's earliest ones, but one that will leave you in a state of shock once the story ends. Her characters may live in violent times, the war, segregation. Her writing feels somehow more pacified than in the past, which gives the story an unusual strength. And you may be tempted to read it in one setting, but be warned that the effect on you, reader, may be overwhelming, which in the end is not necessarily a bad thing, you know.
It sounds dramatic.
Yeah, right, yeah. And once again, I think Toni Morrison is not just resting on her laurels as a winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's a good recommendation there from Clément. He's also been reading as well. Well, it's a book that's one of the most anticipated French novels, Une semaine de vacances, A Week of Holidays. It's by Christine Angot.
Each of her novels has caused a commotion in the little bubble that the Paris literary world is, not only because the content of her fiction is very sexual, but because she's never once stopped pushing the limits of what can be told in fiction. Some are shocked by her novels, others call them genius. This is the first of her novels that I read, in fact, and I wanted to be able to read it without the background noise of people feuding over her books. This year I had the chance to read the novel before it came out, and I have to admit that reading Christine Angot for the first time is a unique literary experience. And I don't want to spoil the story for you, because I would like each reader to be able to read it as a blank sheet like I was upon first reading it, you know. What I can reveal, though, I think lies on the first page of the book. As the novel opens, a man sitting on the toilet asks the young woman coming out of the shower to give him oral sex. The scene is described meticulously, as if the narrator wanted to set a diagnosis of forces at work in the story. A woman, a man, sexual intercourses, but most of all, what appears to be an incestuous relationship. From there on, the storytelling that unfolds becomes clear, limpid, yet often demanding and gnawing, because the reader is no fool and very easily understands what is at work in the story. And what is happening may be very trying. The story is dominated by the voice of the male character. The female character barely has a chance to express herself, and when she attempts to, her voice is overshadowed by his. A second narrative, then, comes into this fiction, one that is told through the headlines of the newspapers published each day of the week of the holidays the two characters spend together. And I don't want to say which events make the headlines, but as the mingle with the conversations between the characters, they draw a picture of the times the story is set in and of the historical and social issues at stake, as they may also be alluding to the author's personal history. And the experience you may get from reading this novel could be as disturbing as it may be also striking, for in the end, it can be read as a victory over the negation of a young girl's life.
Okay, it sounds very passionate stuff, isn't it?
It is.
Did you like it? Would you recommend it briefly?
Well, you know what? It seems to me that whether you like it or dislike it does not matter, because the experience is of a different kind. Remember how puzzled you may have been when seeing a painting or a movie. Well, there may be something similar going on with Christine Ango's novel. Except that as a reader, once you read, you know that what has been revealed to you about human nature, and it's something, you know, it deserves to be read very closely, because what she reveals speaks to you very personally.
Okay, Clément, fantastic.
You're welcome.
His recommendations for this week in the literary world. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us about that and culture. Don't forget, you can have a look at our website on France 24, because that contains all the latest news. Bill Clinton, the lead story there. Also, of course, the decision coming up today about the ECB. You'll find the latest on that on the website, and we'll be covering it during the day here on France 24 as well. That's the news from us today. Then the very latest news coming up with Soma after the break. Do stay with us if you can.